I think that's all the business. So on to this evening's event, which is Prep School. I'm now going to hand over to our teachers for the evening in this wonderful academy. I'll be headmaster. So yes, I'm now going to hand over to Dr. Will Nutland from PrEPster and Greg Owen from I Want PrEP Now.
Thank you. If I'd known it was costumes and teachers and things, I'd have worn my gym slip, but I will wear it in the pub afterwards, I promise. So it's so nice to be here with you. Thank you, Ricky, and the rest of the committee for asking us to come and spend some time with you this evening, especially on a beautiful summer's evening at the beginning of a bank holiday. I'm really grateful that you've come to join us. So my name is Will Nutland, and I always say this at the beginning of these presentations. I'm wearing 3 hats tonight. And the first hat I'm wearing is that I'm a public health doctor. I work at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine in a team called Sigma Research that has a background in sexual health and HIV, and we're about to mark our 30 years of being in existence. So I spend my day researching sex and drugs and all sorts of fascinating things like that. So here's the warning. I find it very hard when I'm talking about sex not to swear. So I will be using fruity language throughout, and I know Greg will be as well. So my second, good, approval. My second hat on is that I am the co-founder of a project called PrEPster. Our website is PrEPster.info. We have little stickers at the back. You can tweet us, find us on Facebook and all those kind of modern things if you're so inclined. And then my third hat on is that I am a PrEP user. I buy generic PrEP online, and Greg and I will talk more about that as the evening goes on.
Wow, you're amazing. My name is Greg Owen. I am co-founder of iwantprepnow.co.uk. Will just sprung the 3 hats thing on me earlier. I don't really have 3 hats. He researches sex and drugs, I do it. Not with him. I'm not going to do my 3 hats. We're going to talk about PrEP today, just to give you a little bit of overview of how it's going to roll out today. We're going to give you top 10 myths and mythbusters on what PrEP is, because we're aware that there may be some people in the room who don't know what PrEP is. And then I'm going to give you a little overview as to the genesis of the site, the journey to now, and the call for demand for PrEP, and most importantly, what you can do. Everyone can do stuff for PrEP. And then Will is going to take over with his presentation, and then we're going to explain a little bit of why we need PrEP and why we need PrEP now. And then we'll take questions from the floor and hopefully be able to answer them. Well, Will, because he's a doctor.
We'll do our best. So another thing that I'll say at the start that Greg and I always say at these events is that we in no way, shape or form see ourselves as the only experts in the room. There are people here who have views, opinions, experiences, and we would really love you to share them if you feel so inclined. We're not saying by any way that there's a right way of thinking about PrEP. We know that PrEP for some people is controversial, may touch some buttons for some of us, and that's absolutely fine to express those views and opinions, and we'll be supportive of those views and opinions. One thing we don't particularly like, though, is sex shaming or slut shaming, as it's been called. And Greg did say that I talk about sex and drugs, and he does it. That's not entirely true. So when we do these kind of talks, and Greg and I have done several dozen together now, we've realized that there are usually a set of key questions that people frequently ask us. So we're going to start just by talking very briefly about some of the key top 10 issues around PrEP that people ask, and kind of myth bust some of them. So first of all, if you've never come to an event like this, and this is really weird for me, I've moved to that age where I need reading spectacles, and if I don't have them on, then I can't read, but now you're all blurred, so I'm sure many of you will empathize. So if this is brand new for you, what is PrEP? So PrEP stands for pre-exposure prophylaxis, so pre-exposure HIV prophylaxis, and that means it's taking an ongoing dose of an anti-HIV drug, the drugs that are normally used for HIV treatment, taking an ongoing dose of that to prevent someone from getting infected with HIV should they become exposed to it. So the best way of thinking of this is that if you've been on holiday or traveled or worked to somewhere in the world that has a high prevalence of malaria, you will take an anti-malaria tablet to prevent you from becoming infected with malaria should you get bitten by a mosquito. So try and think of PrEP in the same way as that. Now, clinical trials have shown, and there have been several, about half a dozen international randomized control trials or semi-randomized control trials of PrEP, have shown that taking PrEP can reduce HIV acquisition by more than a half. But actually, when you dig deeper into those trials, when people are taking those drugs correctly and consistently, you almost reduce your risk of getting HIV to almost zero, so up in the very, very high 90s.
The studies generally say that daily PrEP or Ibergay, which is an event-based dosing system, gives you a risk reduction of 86%. As Will said, that's in a study base, and you will see 86% banded around a lot, but it's as close. We've had one PrEP fail so far, and the conditions for that to happen were like a lot of ducks had to line up for that to happen. Just in very simple terms, you cannot develop resistance to PrEP, like your body doesn't get used to the drug in its system and then it will fail you. In this situation of the one PrEP fail, the HIV that the PrEP user was exposed to was a particularly rare drug-resistant version of the virus to both of the active drugs in PrEP. Also, what you'll find with HIV, if it does mutate to incorporate a resistance to a set of drugs, that to incorporate that mutation and resistance actually weakens the HIV virus itself, so therefore it's less chance of becoming infected if you're exposed to that version of the virus.
And in real life trials, so studies in places like San Francisco, when people are taking PrEP in real time, in real life, in the study in San Francisco that's been in the news in the last 6 months or so, not one person has become infected with HIV who is taking PrEP on a daily basis. And I think this throws up lots of questions for us and lots of challenges, but lots of optimism about whether we can use a daily medication to turn around the HIV epidemic in places like London. And one of the first things that people say about, for me as a PrEP user, is what about side effects? Are you going to get side effects if you use PrEP?
I'm actually HIV positive, was diagnosed on the 12th of August 2015, so just coming up a year. And my first set of treatment was Truvada and Raltegravir, and I had absolutely no side effects at all, apart from slight wooziness for about 2 or 3 minutes at a time on 2 occasions, but then it might have been a hangover. Listed side effects for Truvada or PrEP will be slight stomach cramps or stomach upset for about 7 to 10 days. Some people may experience light headaches or migraines, again for about 7 to 10 days. A little bit of fatigue, low energy, again about 7 to 10 days, and you find that all of these side effects are quite mild and pass fully within the first 4 weeks of being on that prevention method.
So there's now been, I know you've got your hand up, I'll come on to you just a second. There have been studies, modelling studies that have been done in the UK that show if PrEP was targeted to those people who are at most risk of HIV acquisition, that it would save the National Health Service money in the medium to long term. So it's cost saving if PrEP is targeted to the right people.
2 things on that. PrEP is an opt-in protection method, so you can go on PrEP, and if your situation changes or you don't think you need PrEP anymore, then you can come off PrEP. HIV, on the other hand, is a lifetime of care, so you're on those drugs for the rest of your life if you become HIV positive. To give you a very rough version of costing, per year to treat a person living with HIV costs our healthcare system about £20,000 per person. That incorporates clinic costs and drug costs. For a year to provide PrEP for a HIV negative person, for a year at current branded drug Truvada will cost about £5,000 a year. However, if you were to source generics, which you can source from my website, they're about £45, £50 a month, so less than £500 a year to keep a person HIV negative, or £20,000 a year to treat a person living with HIV, with a lifetime of care roughly in excess of about £350,000 per person, lifetime of care. In regards to targeting PrEP, PrEP is not for everybody. It's not going to be used for and embraced by everybody. However, we need to have it as access for all with no barriers, because as soon as we start identifying one group of people that it can only be for, we start to put barriers in place for anybody else who doesn't fall within that category. On top of that, once you start saying gay men who are at high risk, I hate the word risk with sex. Unfortunately, we are at high risk of HIV acquisition because we're gay men. We're always at risk, but I hate using the word risk with sex. So when you say men who have sex with men who are high risk, trans women who are high risk, sex workers who are high risk, people who inject drugs who are high risk, what you do is you stigmatize that group of people. And then what you do is you stigmatize the prevention tool. So therefore, PrEP is for sluts, PrEP is for barebacking whores, PrEP is for sex work. It's not good. So not everyone will want PrEP, but we need to make it access for all with no barriers.
So if Greg wasn't clear enough, then we're not saying as either two organisations that PrEP is for everyone. We're not saying either that PrEP will and should replace condoms, and that's one of the key online issues and criticisms that we've encountered. So we're not saying that PrEP is for everyone, and we're not saying that PrEP should replace condoms. However, we do know from some of the current trials that have been done that PrEP is most effective and most frequently prescribed for people who do have a problem consistently using condoms.
Yeah, just on that, I mean, things are changing very rapidly on the PrEP landscape. Our sites aren't even, I think, they're 7 months old, so I'll come on to it in my presentation. What we've done in 7 months is phenomenal. However, I have found with people searching for PrEP, so this is a prevention method that isn't free, that isn't easily accessed, that you have to source yourself, that you can't get support from on the NHS. If someone is trying to get hold of that to use as HIV prevention, that person's going to adhere, and that person probably knows they're already at risk and taking risks. And if they're going to jump through that many hoops, this person knows that they're already at high risk. Or they're the worried well, or the early adapters, we do have to consider that. But generally, anyone who has wanted PrEP to date knows that they're at a very high risk of contracting HIV.
So Greg's already mentioned that PrEP isn't yet available on the National Health Service. Both Greg and I and the projects that we've founded both think that PrEP should be available on the National Health Service. We think that PrEP has the potential to start to turn around HIV incidents in places like London, Manchester, Birmingham, Brighton, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Cardiff. We think it holds huge potential. Because it's not yet available on the National Health Service, some of us, including myself, are purchasing generic PrEP online. I buy it directly from India. Greg and I, over the last 6 to 7 months, have worked with a lot of other stakeholders to work out whether this is legal. It is legal, so long as you buy no more than 3 months of a supply at a time. You have to buy it only for personal use. And Greg later on will start to explain how he's developed safeguards to make sure that the drugs that his website the pharmacies that his website sends you to are actually selling the real things. And later on we'll also explain the tests that we have had done to check the drugs. And I've been one of the guinea pigs who's taken drugs and had my bloods tested. And there are a number of 50 or 60, 70 other people in the UK who are currently also acting as guinea pigs to make sure that the drug levels are there.
Okay, I can announce, actually, because I spoke to 5016 Street this week, that they provided me with 54 of those tests from 54 individuals, and they're just correlating the data for another 50-something. So to date, over the last couple of months, we've had 100 people's blood tested for active drug levels. So we're over 100, which is great.
And just to finish this section before Greg goes on to do his presentation, I'm going to go and let him line up his slides. There are 2 final things we want to say. If after the end of the session today, or if you're watching this online and you're thinking about purchasing generic PrEP yourself, Firstly, if you're not in the UK, please check the laws of the country where you currently live. Secondly, if you are living in the UK, we strongly, strongly, strongly recommend that you only start using generic PrEP with the support of a proper healthcare provider. And that healthcare provider, we recommend first point of call should be a health advisor or a clinician within a sexual health service. If they're unable to offer you that advice, then telephone helplines such as Terence Higgins Trust's THD Direct Line, iBase, both of our websites. And then finally, and we're saying this at every single event we do, but we did notice on your Facebook page that someone raised this, probably laughingly, that neither of us or our projects are funded by Gilead or any other pharmaceutical companies. In fact, both of our websites right now are 100% funded through donations or out of our own pockets. We're not paid to do the work that we're doing, so we're volunteering our time, as are our colleagues on our websites. So, Greg, are you going to have a go?
I'm going to speak. Okay, I'm not going to reintroduce myself. My name is Greg Owen from iwantprepnow.co.uk. The most important thing about our website is that we provide a link to buy now, which will reference to buy genuine, legitimate, generic PrEP. The reason why, actually, just to highlight on Will's point, the reason why I say generic PrEP and not generic Truvada is because I can't stand Gilead, and therefore I wouldn't publicize the branded drug. And it's not accessible either, so we definitely have no association with Gilead. So I'm going to tell you how the website came around. So I have been talking about PrEP because I've been noticing it from the States, because it's been approved there for prevention, Truvada as prevention, since 2012, June 2012. So I could see all my friends on Facebook having these amazing experiences and really embracing their sexuality, and PrEP worked. So I had been sharing articles here and there for the last 18 months. And a HIV positive friend of mine changed his meds, and he had 2 months of Truvada left over, and he messaged me on one Tuesday evening saying, "Oh, you can have my Truvada to use as PrEP." So then, big mouth, on social media to about 8,000 followers, tweeted and Facebooked that I'm going to finally put my money where my mouth is. I'm going to Dean Street tomorrow, and I'm going to start PrEP at the weekend. So then Wednesday, the next morning, I go to Dean Street, and 20 minutes later, I get a positive diagnosis on my HIV test. Yeah. It's fine, it's not a problem. But I then had to tell the 8,000 people that I couldn't take PrEP because it was a little bit too late. So I didn't mind sharing that story because, you know, I have a lot of HIV positive friends, and I was quite clued up, so I could deal with me then instead of the HIV. But what it did do was create a whole lot of attention around me just missing the PrEP boat. And I have to say, I was getting like 8 to 10 messages a day for people who, I used to be a club promoter, so I was quite visible within the community. Just getting a lot of messages from people, 8 to 10 a day. And I really didn't have a clue. This is like middle of August. I kind of had been sharing articles, but I didn't have a clue. And I just thought, you know what? Okay, I have a moment of pure clarity here. If I don't really know anything, and all these people are interested in PrEP, well then surely my position and standing on this is, I'm going to go on this journey, I'm going to learn about it, I'm going to do what I can, and you can all come with me. And it kind of worked. But they were doing my head in. So I was like, I can't deal with people anymore. Let's just make a website. So we made the website so we could walk away from PrEP and never have to answer any more questions. In fact, I'm standing in front of you now with a PowerPoint presentation, and that really didn't fucking work, did it? Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. So as I said, the most amount of noise was being made in the States by a wonderful PrEP support and information and advice group called PrEP Facts, run by the amazing Damon L. Jacobs. If you just look at this little bit here, that's almost 14,500 members across the world. So where was the noise in the UK? We certainly didn't have as much as we needed. My Truvada Diaries, which was what I was going to start writing when I was going to start taking PrEP, obviously couldn't do because of my HIV diagnosis. What we found then in the run-up to launching the site, we decided the site launched on the 5th of October, so we decided about the start of September we'd make this website. We knew we had about 4 weeks. So I decided to try and find out what the UK really thought about PrEP, what they knew about PrEP, what they thought about PrEP, and how we would best position PrEP once we launched this website. So I created a little set of memes. This one I thought was quite straightforward, very inoffensive. An umbrella, which is PrEP, keeping you protected from HIV. And notice we point out from the start, it's HIV protection. It doesn't claim to be anything else, it's HIV protection. So then we went on to the rubber duck. So ducking, if you have an iPhone, this will really piss you off. Ducking PrEP, autocorrection for HIV protection. Now, I thought that was quite inoffensive. People didn't like the duck. It's a blue duck, right? Like, who can find that offensive? But immediately the calls that Will just mentioned started to spring up. Are you saying we should abandon condoms? This is totally irresponsible and reckless of you, and you're sending out the wrong message here, Greg. And my favorite question, what about other STIs? PrEP doesn't protect you from those, of course it doesn't. But just to point out, and to quote Sheena McCormick, who was the lead on PROUD study, STIs have been rising steadily for the last 20 years. We know that, we have the data, we have the studies. Now, because of PrEP, HIV doesn't have to also. It's really key that we start looking at it that way. It's like you don't expect a seatbelt to stop you from getting cancer. Why would you expect PrEP to stop you getting gonorrhea? Jesus. Okay, so I couldn't curse and swear because I was about to become the face of PrEP. So I decided to try and appease people. And we found that the word extra, just by introducing that word extra into the image, immediately silenced those people. So then extra became my bargaining tool. I started to get a little bit cheeky, by the way, brace yourselves. So this positioning, as I mentioned, kept the dialogue and the focus on HIV and STI prevention alone and away from moral judgments. So extra sort of became our collateral. So as long as you used extra instead of, then we could kind of go there. So here you see PrEP and condoms taken on my sofa in Old Street. And then I decided to put it in the toolkit, the phrase that we use. Cue the boys in blue. Okay, right. This one was a calculated choice. So I Googled sexy blue, and the Smurfs came up. Now, I don't know about you, but like Papa Smurf is seriously working for me. And again, surprise, surprise, horror sets in when something appears sexual or you're deriving pleasure from something. We are really averse to doing that here in the UK, really, really averse. So trivializing, that's what I was doing, trivializing sex by introducing the sexy Smurfs. In fact, like I just mentioned, I was actually trying to introduce the sexual element in the least sexual way possible. Papa Smurf would disagree, but so key learnings basically from that were a lot of gay men globally have a Smurf fetish. What can you do? This meme actually has appeared at Croy and in Johannesburg and at about 4 different international and high-profile HIV conventions. I know that the sexy Smurfs got around. Okay, so at that point I realized I was just never going to be able to please everyone, so I stopped trying. Here are the remaining memes. So PrEP, the time is here. Oh, I got a request from this one. Honestly, in the Facebook group, Damon's Facebook group, they call each other PrEP warriors, which I love, so we took Avatar. Preppy Monster. Preppy! Okay, and here's one I designed with my lovely friend, Dr. Will Nutland, in mind. Oops, wrong slide. Yeah, wrong slide. Dr. Will says, every diva needs protection. Talking about himself. So we changed direction a little bit once people warmed up to PrEP and started to embrace it. I started to kind of see a shift here in the UK. This is all over just like a couple of weeks, like a month. This one for me is one of my favorites. So a message from the SCARE team. We found that laughter is more powerful than screams. PrEP, don't be afraid to get HIV protected. You know what, I'm going to stop here. This isn't in the slide. I had to really try and find a way, considering I'd just been diagnosed as HIV positive, now campaigning and trying to raise awareness and access to this prevention method through a loophole we found of importing generics. Here I am now, HIV positive, just missed the PrEP boat, doing my best and putting myself out there, sharing my story to raise awareness of PrEP, and I'm getting hated on meanly by people within our community. And it's like, are you fucking serious? Like, I can't take PrEP now. This is actually directly for you, not me, and I'm getting attacked. So I had to find a way, and I got it really, really harshly on several occasions. So I had to find a way to reconcile that with myself. And if any of you are going to go out there and advocate and educate on PrEP, I would ask you to bear this in mind. Condom advocates and PrEP shamers and PrEP haters are really, really no different from PrEP activists and PrEP advocates. At the core of it, we're all not particularly pleased with HIV. We're all frightened of HIV. We've had 30 years of it. Very recently, before it was death, HIV equaled you'd be dead soon. Now, I'm only 35, I've only been diagnosed less than a year. That still sits on everyone's shoulders. So I had to try and find the common ground. The common ground was these people, they don't want HIV in their lives. Nobody does. But instead of removing the source of the fear, i.e. the risk of contracting HIV, they rebel against the option of removing the fear of HIV. To tell people they can live fear-free of HIV is a very big thing. You're asking to unlearn 30 years of pain and heartache. It's very, very hard. It's going to take some time. We're not going to get there overnight, but it's a big ask. You know, we're unlearning and relearning. So I really have found my peace with that for the moment. Here we go. I was drunk when I made this one. Got the tagline wrong. And we couldn't finish off without a little bit of slut shaming. So we have a tag in the States, Travada whore. So I think that's quite a cute little bear. And this is one of my favorites, because finally I managed to put condoms and PrEP together in a way that people would actually accept. So there was this big thing, whereas if you talked about PrEP, then you hated condoms, like you wanted to beat the condom with the blue pill, and that's just nonsense. So I managed to put them together, and it's like there was like this turf war. So I posted this on Facebook, I think, saying, contrary to recent media reports, the condom and PrEP have not fallen out. There is no turf war, and they would appreciate your respectful distance at this troubling time, something like that. It worked. And it was nice to see David Cameron get involved recently. I'll just leave that there. Okay, so that's PrEP in the UK, the journey to demand and the call for supply. This noise is really whacking me out. Okay, so what can you do? Very simple. Take your phone out if it's not off. You can do it now. Put this in notes. If you don't want to tweet it, I don't mind, but put it in your notes. You can tweet this. So hashtag where is PrEP, hashtag PrEP now. Your handle is at NHS England. I'm going to tell you how Twitter can change the world. Well, actually Twitter can change the world, but I'm going to tell you what the part that Twitter played on this. So Will and I probably, can I disclose like trade secrets? Okay, but you realize this game's up once I make it public. Okay, so nothing Will and I do is ever like really accidental or unthought out. We will orchestrate social media wars and shaming of people, where quite often I'm the bitch, basically, and Will is the person who swoops in as the responsible doctor type to try and mend bridges that I have burnt. So it's all been quite orchestrated, and we do that, and we played it out over social media. So there was a public consultation due to happen on PrEP, and Will said, what do you think is going to happen? And I was like, oh, I'm quite optimistic. I think we're going to get PrEP in June. Will was like, do the math, honey. And I was like, what do you mean, what math? And he was like, for the consultation to be the length that it needs to be, it needed to start last week, or this week. Either way, we've missed the consultation. And I was like, no. Then I did the math. So I was like, fuck it, I'm going to tweet that. He was like, gonna dare you. Within about 5 minutes of me tweeting that, Will's phone rang off the hook, and we now all got together for the first time ever, CEOs and trustees and staff members of our leading HIV charities, grassroots organisations, community representatives, community leaders, right across the board. We all sat at one table for the first time ever, and things moved really fast. So, HIV is everyone's issue. The clue is in the name. Human immunodeficiency virus. If you're human, this concerns you. So what can you do? Visit the sites PrEPster.info and iwantprepnow.co.uk. Learn the facts. Talk to your friends. Talk to your partners. Let's get prepping. Thank you.
Can you hold that while I set up? So Greg told you a bit about the development of I Want PrEP Now, and there was some really weird and odd synchronicity going on, because Greg and I right now might seem like bosom buddies who've known each other for a long time, but we've actually only really known each other for about 6 months. I used to work at the Terence Higgins Trust. I've worked in sexual health either as a volunteer or as a paid worker for around 25 years. And I made a decision about 8 or 9 years to leave doing frontline HIV prevention work to go and start doing research. And it was very hard for me not to keep kind of dipping back in and trying to do health promotion and activism and step back and become an academic. And About this time last year, I started to get personally and professionally quite frustrated by the lack of good, simple information about PrEP. In fact, there was very little. There's very great scientific information. Organizations like AIDSmap and iBase have excellent, quite complex scientific information. But I was talking to outreach workers who are out working on the gay scene in London, saying that about a third of the men they were talking to were asking questions about PrEP, but they had no place to refer people to. I was also starting to get concerned that people wanted to do something about PrEP, but actually there wasn't, again, an easy, compact place to go to think about what people could do. So I started working with an ex-colleague of mine, a guy called Mark Thompson, who is a peer mentor at Positively UK, Charlie, a colleague of mine, and Richie, a friend of mine, and we developed this website, PrEPster. There are my contact information details at the bottom. If you want to email us, you can also, again, if you do that tweet thing, we're at Team PrEPster. I'm also at Dr. Will N. So we're on, again, there's little cards and information at the back if you want to get in touch with us. But the other thing that we started to do through the website, as well as educate people about PrEP, was that we developed a take action section. So again, you can go and find this on our website. And in collaboration with organizations like GMFA, THT, National AIDS Trust, we developed 9 actions, simple actions to take, including writing a letter to your MP, writing to your Director of Public Health and asking the Director of Public Health what they intend to do to make PrEP available locally if it became available on the NHS, talking to your friends, challenging PrEP stigma, PrEP shaming, all of these things. So that was the thing that we did when we launched the website. But I'm actually not going to talk now about the website. I'm going to talk about some of my research. And I'm going to go back to a presentation that I did last year at last year's LGBT History Month at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. I don't know if anyone here in the room is familiar with a Japanese presentation style called pechakucha. Pechakucha involves having 20 slides that last for 20 seconds in a presentation, and the slides move every 20 seconds regardless of whether you've finished the point on those slides. And it leads for very good, concise presentation, and there's a whole very nerdy network of people now who enjoy going to different pechakucha talks and whole conferences that take part. I really challenge you to go and have a look at some of them. They're incredibly hard to write and put together because you have to be very concise about where your slides are going. So for LGBT History Month, I was asked to organise a PrEP event. So rather than having pechakucha, we had something called PrEPchakucha, when 4 of us did pechakucha presentations on different aspects of PrEP. I'm going to redo mine tonight, but I'm not going to do 20 seconds per slide, partly because I didn't have enough time to practice to get it all back in, and we would be going all over the place. So what for the last 3 years, I've been researching the acceptability of PrEP in men who have sex with men in London. So I've been doing qualitative social work, interviewing men and asking them about if a drug like PrEP became available, would you consider taking it? And what do you think the implications of taking a drug like that might be? So I'm going to give you the key highlights of my doctoral research in about 6 minutes. With 20 slides, but I am going to have my finger on the button. So this is summarizing what those 20 men I interviewed told me about what they were thinking about PrEP. And just as a caveat, I did this research before the PROUD trial fully enrolled. So the PROUD trial was the England-wide randomized controlled trial, the clinical trial. So by the time I'd done my first half of the interviews, the PROUD trial hadn't enrolled at all. By the time I did my second half, PROUD had recruited, but none of the men I interviewed were on the clinical trial, and one of the men was buying PrEP online himself. So only one was currently a PrEP user. Would you use PrEP? I ask Francis. He pauses and considers for a moment. Would I use it, he replies. Would I, personally? Probably. Absolutely. And as he thinks about it, he considers the potential. This means we could go without condoms. That would be pretty amazing. It's always been a stress that we've never been able to do that we'll worry about it. We could get rid of that stress. Francis tells me about the other mixed HIV status couples he knows. He says they'd be very enthusiastic about PrEP too. It's the best alternative there is to a vaccine, isn't it? He asks. I think anyone in the same situation as me would be very enthusiastic about that. I don't think I'd want to put a drug in my body that I don't necessarily need, says Ed. I wouldn't feel comfortable taking something when it isn't really something I need, I guess. He says his current risk wouldn't justify taking it. I want to weigh up any possible consequences of taking a daily pill and consider how I might use PrEP in the future if my circumstances changed. I do tend to like guys who are positive, Philip tells me. And so it would open up possibilities of having a relationship with someone. I want to have unprotected sex with my partner, and that rules out sex with guys who are positive, and this would make it an option. If I was in a depressive cycle, having PrEP in my drawer would be a peace of mind, knowing it was there. Francis, Ed, and Philip are 3 of 20 men who let me into their lives to tell me their thoughts about PrEP and how acceptable PrEP might be to them. As I interview them, I'm struck by how these men see PrEP as offering potential. Potential around pleasure, joy, intimacy, developing relationships, or reducing stress and improving mental health. All of these men had tested HIV negative in the last year before the interview, and all had had sex since that test that had potentially exposed them to HIV. In some cases, men had had condomless sex with a man whose HIV status was unknown or not discussed. Some men had had condomless sex with men they knew to have HIV. A third of the men had a known HIV-positive partner, and only one of the men was using PrEP. I ask Alex, what impact would PrEP have on the sex you have? And he says, taking a pill every day is a reminder of what's at risk. I think a constant reminder every day, I have to take a pill, I have to take a pill. Something in the back of your head might click in. And if you are getting into a situation, you might think, hang on, there's a reason why I'm taking a pill, why this behavior is risky. I asked Colin, do you think PrEP would have an impact on the times you use condoms? And he considers for a moment and says, would it make me take more risks? Probably. Certainly. Forget probably, certainly. If I was on holiday, I'd think, fuck it, and go into the bar of a night and come out and find me in the morning with a mop. Francis Ed, whoops, wrong way. But would Colin tell those men he has sex with he was using PrEP? No way, absolutely no way. I would be entirely in control of my own arse, and there's no way I'd let anyone try to bully me. No way, because that's asking for trouble. You might as well get your arse in the sling at the sauna and have a ticket machine. This issue of PrEP use and disclosure and discussion is central to men's consideration of its acceptability. Lewis tells me, if PrEP was publicly known about and publicly available and other men were like, why are you taking PrEP? What are you doing? I'd be like, why aren't you taking PrEP? What are you doing? Alex tells me he has friends he talks to about the type of sex he has. They might recommend it to me, you know. That weekend's coming up. You know what you get like, you know. Maybe you should think about that. And Javi says his friends would find his PrEP use rational and sensible. My first impression is that if I was to tell my friends I'm taking a pill and it's halving my risk of getting infected, then everyone would understand. Even my straight friends will think it's a rational thing to do. Even my straight friends will think it's a rational thing to do, but then again, I do tell them I'm a cum whore. Duncan says he has concerns about talking about PrEP with his friends. It's like admitting to irresponsible behavior, but I can imagine that some people, once people became familiar with it, it becomes really quite common for people to talk about it. Max tells me he has a couple of really good friends who are HIV positive. When he thinks about telling them about using PrEP, he's concerned about their response. He says, a slightly, well, bitter's not the right word, sort of really down on anyone who's unsafe. Like if they know about the risks I've taken, they'd be really furious. Jovan doesn't get why guys wouldn't talk about PrEP. He says, I know some guys wouldn't talk about it. I know one guy, he'll be at a club with things up his arse, and he won't even talk about anything to do with his arse. And I'm thinking, but last week I saw you with that thing right up your arse, and now you're being all coy about someone mentions anything to do with your arse. Why is there a bucket there? Max tells me that other men, don't start. Max tells me that other men who take PrEP are men to be trusted. He's being responsible about his decisions. He's doing something that reduces his chance of getting HIV, so that makes me safer too. That makes me see him as being more responsible and not less. It's like the guys who quiz you in detail about your status, says Mark. It would be a positive thing for me. Jovan tells me that PrEP wouldn't change anything for him, but he's worried about what all those other men will do. I don't think I would suddenly be looking for something else, so personally no, but I really think that others would, and I suppose my greatest concern is it would potentially balloon the infection for other STDs, because they think, oh, I've taken my pill, I can be as big a slut as I want to be. Alex doesn't understand the assumption that using PrEP automatically results in more risk-taking. It's like a vaccine in a way. It's almost like you're going to go somewhere to prevent something. With a tetanus shot, you don't go out and start licking dirty nails because you know that you're covered against that. And I think that would be like the same thing. I go back to Francis, who I spoke to right at the very start, and ask him, do you think there would be any stigma to using PrEP? And he can't understand why there would be. I don't think I've ever heard someone say, you've taken the hepatitis B vaccine? How horrible is that? Can you believe it? You're such a slag. So no, I don't think there would be. And would PrEP be socially acceptable for you to consider using it? I asked Duncan. It needs to be socially acceptable, he says, but it wouldn't affect whether I use it or not. For it to be part of, the culture would help. Just like wearing condoms is really, it will affect people's perceptions of it, and it will take some time for them to make up their minds. And once they have it, will encourage people to take it or not. And that's what's important. Thank you to the guys who gave me their time. Thank you.
Okay, so we are going to do why we need PrEP now, and then we're going to take questions from the floor. I'm just going to give you a little bit of oversight to this video. So after the NHS England decision to U-turn on what they've been doing for the last couple of years on PrEP, which was the 20th of March, was it? Something like that. We were quite rightly outraged. So a group of what we call key player PrEPsters, which involves clinicians and charity members, and Will and myself and all the other guys involved with our websites, we got together to discuss how best to deal with this, and also to start to really accept that we're going to have, regardless of what happens, we're going to have to go ahead and we're going to have to run this community healthcare system anyway, and let's try to offer a better service. So this was actually a planning meeting to develop extra additional services. I'm going to turn these lights off so you can see it. It's all right, I'll find it. Do the lights go off? Oh, sexual. Okay, here we go. So, like I say, we met up for a development meeting, and this is what happened.
What do you think now you know a bit? Can I ask what you think?
There is still inconsistencies, and I mean, now I know more who I would believe someone's figures over someone else's. I think that took, more than a month of research, I think, to develop that. So.
Can I actually say something? Sorry. For more than 1 year, I had a relationship with an HIV positive being HIV negative, and no one ever approached me and said, "Why don't you try PrEP?" Or "Why don't you go to the industry?" I was new in the country, I didn't know anything about PrEP. I came from Portugal. HIV is basically, you're going to die. So no one talks about it. We talk about AIDS still. Like, you don't get HIV, you get AIDS. So one of the things I noticed was in terms of NHS, and that I have to point the finger to NHS, I never heard about PrEP. I searched about PrEP, there was very, very few information. And one thing, from my experience, it's a bit too late now, but at the time, a place where you can put your ideas, you ask your questions, ask another PrEP. And I think in that case, it will be vital, because what I felt at the moment was a bunch of different medical... Okay, first thing I thought was about side effects. You're going to have terrible side effects, everything, blah, 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 blah. Basically, I barely felt any side effects, to be honest. Second of all, I just didn't know anyone that was on PrEP. I was trying to knock on doors, and of course, now, if it was today, I would know straight going to Mortimer or going to 56th Street. I just arrived to the UK, I had no idea what...
See, I think that means we need to kind of turn the question on its head a bit and ask, what does a 22, 23-year-old who's either just arrived in London from Portugal or just come down from Leeds, what do they need? Because a 35-year-old white guy that knows how to go to just Google PrEP and to get it and can afford it, those questions will be answered. So in some ways we need to go for the lowest common denominator here.
Yeah.
And I'm picking up on Alex's point as well about the amount of information. In HIV, there's always loads of information. Lots of it.
Just quickly, because we're trying to be mindful that it may be ABC of PrEP for some people, and that you might not know as we tend to leapfrog to the end game. So if any of you are going to go out and talk to your friends, we encourage you to visit the sites, but there is a difference between men who have sex with men taking PrEP and cis women taking PrEP for protection. We're not quite sure, nobody is quite sure exactly how and why this works, we just know it does, but I can break it down for you in simple terms. For men who have sex with men, where the penetrative sex will be in the rectum, we need PrEP to reach that area for protection. There's currently a debate in our group at the minute between blood and site of infection tissue, so the rectum or the blood, on what is most important in regards to timings, but let's just break it down. Men who have sex with men, where the rectum is the contraction exchange point of HIV, They can go intermittent PrEP, so every other day or 4 pills a week, and they can do an event-based dosing system where you can take a pill anywhere between 2 and 24 hours before you're due to have a risk. The reason is very simple. Because it's in the rectum, we find that the protection and the active drug reaches the rectum really quickly, whereas if it's to go into vaginal walls, the tissue there, it takes a much longer time for it to accrue protection in that tissue. And also, the way that HIV works is quite a tricky little virus. There is a lesser concentration of, to make it simple again, a lesser concentration of DNA and usable material, if you like, in the rectum, whereas the vaginal walls, because it's a productive system, it's much more easy to contract HIV for HIV, to be able to take root in that. So that's why they need the extra prolonged, sustained protection. So for women, just to break it down, very simple, is we only advocate for daily. For protection levels to reach what we call adequate is at least 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, but we say 3. For men, it's about a week. So if you're speaking to your friends and they're women, cis women, let's highlight that. Also, a huge big failing at the minute is PrEP for trans people. We actually really, really failing on HIV research, the research of HIV meds, how they impact on a woman's body. Now, we have very, very little data compared to what HIV antiretrovirals do for a man's body. We have practically no fucking data on what it does to hormone-impacted material for trans people. I'm not going to go too much into the specifics, but it's a huge inequality, and it's not fair. So I encourage you to be inclusive of trans people and to highlight them as much, because they are even more disproportionately affected by HIV than men who have sex with men. And cripplingly, they are even more impacted by self-community stigma. It's incredibly difficult for trans people. They're stigmatized as trans. As a HIV-positive trans person, it's doubly crippling, and it's not fair. We've had to shoulder this for a long time as men who have sex with men. Let's help each other out.
You may have covered... Sorry, go on. Okay. You may have covered this whilst I stepped out of a room. It was to switch the air conditioning on, so it wasn't me being rude. What's your view on clinic hopping?
So the question was, what's our view on clinic hopping? So clinic hopping is the practice of, if you can't get PrEP through either by buying it or obtaining it another way, is by going to sexual health clinics and asking for PEP. So that's post-exposure prophylaxis. So at the moment, you can go into a clinic, and if you've had a risk episode, you are given 28 days worth of antiretroviral therapies, of which one of the 2 drugs usually given is Truvada, so the drug that's used for PrEP. And we know that some people have been going from one clinic, getting PEP, but taking it as PrEP, to take it on an ongoing basis, and then when that 1 month's worth of pill runs out, they go to another clinic and then move on taking PEP in that way. So that's why it's called clinic hopping. So Greg and I have spoken to a fair few people who have clinic hopped, and I don't think my personal view really matters. I think it's probably complex. I understand why some people will do it. But all of the people I've spoken to who are doing clinic hopping are finding that it adds a whole set of stress to their life. So you have to go into a clinic, you have to present that you've had a risk episode, and you have to take time off work or college or whatever you're doing, have time away to make that appointment. Most of those clinics will only give you an initial few days worth of PEP because they want to check that you don't have HIV, so they give you a test and then they want to do a further test. So you're having to make at least 2 appointments. And then you have to do that all over again the next month and then the next month. And if you consistently went to the same clinic and used the same name, or they recognized you and you went month after month after month, they would probably start raising questions about what other support you need other than being given PEP.
I had a different opinion. I actually... just curious, are you talking about Patrick Strudwick's BuzzFeed piece or my original piece? You know, clinic hopping is a thing we do. I wrote an article back in October flagging it up, and Patrick very kindly took it and distributed it to hundreds of thousands of people. I'll just point out a few facts and figures on clinic. First of all, I think fuck it, do it. Because here's the bottom line. They give you 30 days, 28 or 30 days worth of what I was on for my original HIV meds. So 30 Truvada and 60 Voltegravir. Okay, so if you do that, 6 clinics, and then you take intermittent PrEP, that's you for a year, okay? What's the option if you know you're high risk, yeah? Okay, if you're the worried well or you don't need PrEP, you shouldn't be doing that. But if you do, and your healthcare system isn't providing just the one drug, fucking do it. Because the option is you're going to be on those drugs for the rest of your life. They can go fuck themselves as far as I'm concerned. I'm getting a bit fruity. But that in itself, I think clinic hopping is a prime example of how our NHS England are totally fucking clueless. First of all, we are taking 90 pills when all we want is the 30 Truvada. So that's instantly a drug waste of 2/3. Second of all, like Will said, you're highlighting up other risk alerts. So if you're up there every week, it's whether chemsex issues or whether you claim you've been raped or sexual abuse. So and also because you have the clinic hop, you can't go back to that clinic. What you do is you generate a new patient profile. So not just are you costing for ongoing drug, all of the associated clinic costs and generating a new, which is double the retention cost to the local authority. NHS England need to open their fucking eyes. I say go for it. I have a blog post that details very clearly how to clinic hop, and I'll give it to anyone who wants it. Also, yes, most clinics did give you a week and then another 3 weeks. I hear through the grapevine some clinics are just chucking 4 weeks at you straight away because they know what the fuck you're doing, and they love it.
Okay, we'll go here, and then there.
I think Greg referred to PrEP as the little blue pill. And now there's another little blue pill which sometimes comes into play. How much is known about how PrEP interacts with other drugs, legal and illegal?
Very simply, Truvada is with the branded drug. That's been around for, I think, how long have we had Truvada? 8 years. However, the 2 active drugs that are in Truvada we've had for much longer, over 15 years. Now, I would tend to say you get HIV from having sex. So people who have HIV have had sex. There's no shame in that. People who are now living with HIV, I can tell you straight up, we still have sex. So if there was a lot of drug interactions, it would be pretty useless to use as treatment and pretty useless to use as prevention, because let me tell you, you cannot stop people having sex. So there is a website you can use. You can use the Liverpool University drug interaction specifically for HIV drugs. I can give you the link if you want. You basically put in tenofovir and then emtricitabine, which is the second drug, and then you choose what it's interacting with. And I get quite a lot of questions, but it's never Viagra because people just generally don't care that much. They're taking it anyway. They take 2 blue pills instead of 1. No, you're all right with Viagra. The only thing with PrEP is the only thing I would think of party drugs wise is G, because it's quite acidic. You probably don't want to be taking a shot of G as you're taking a Truvada or any drug really. That's it.
And just to add to that, I think there is some evidence that if you're taking drugs like Truvada and you're taking party drugs, they can volumize the impact of that drug. So I certainly know people who were taking whole ecstasy before they were taking HIV drugs, and then now they're taking HIV drugs, they're suddenly finding that they're tripping their tits off with something that used to not have much of an impact. Yeah. So we had, okay.
Thank you very much. I have a question about the clinical study that you mentioned. How many people were involved in that study? And you mentioned that people were using PrEP correctly. They have much better reduction in terms of HIV prevention. How many of people who took PrEP correctly, how do you identify it? And how many people took placebo correctly in the other side of the arm of the study in our city?
Okay, so I'm not going to be able to answer all of that data straight off the top of my head. So let's look at the iPrEP study I talked about wasn't a UK study. So why don't we for a second talk about the PROUD study, which was a study that was done in England. So 544, something like so, around 550 men who have sex with men and trans women. And that trial was different from the PrEP trial because by that point of that trial starting, we already knew that PrEP worked. So it would have been unethical to have a blind placebo trial for that. So how that trial worked was that half of the people who enrolled in the trial were randomized into having Truvada immediately. So they were offered Truvada for up to 24 months in the initial stages of that research project. So 2 years on Truvada, so half of the men. The other half of the participants were randomized into receiving Truvada at month 13 of enrollment. And what that was trying to ascertain was if you were on a clinical trial and you knew that you were either taking a real drug or you knew that that real drug was going to be made available to you later on, would taking that drug have an impact on the type of sex you have and things like rates of sexually transmitted infections? Yeah. So that trial, the PROUD trial, was stopped early, or rather the deferred arm was stopped early. And the deferred arm was stopped early, and everyone who was on the deferred arm was offered the possibility of moving into the active arm. That means that if you were expecting to take drug in a number of months' time and you were still waiting, you were offered the chance to start taking drug immediately. And that deferral was stopped because an independent safety group were looking at the numbers of people who were becoming infected with HIV in the deferred arm versus the active arm, and finding that it was showing that the drugs were highly effective at preventing HIV. So the headline of that trial showed that PrEP was 86% effective. So if you weren't taking drug, about 250 people who were in the deferred arm, about 20 of them became infected with HIV. Yeah, of the people in the active arm, so the people who were taking drug, 3 of them became infected with HIV. But when they started, so that's what gives you the 86% figure. But when they scratched below the surface to find out the circumstances of those 3 men who had been diagnosed with HIV on the active arm, they found that one of those men, they are almost certain, was HIV positive at enrollment, and the test, he was so recently infected that the test wasn't reactive. With the other 2 people, when they went and attempted to follow up, they found that those men hadn't returned to clinic and hadn't consistently taken their PrEP, so they'd stopped taking PrEP, but had later come on and received an HIV positive test result. So some people are saying that therefore means that the 86% efficacy figure is an underrepresentation of how effective PrEP really is. Okay, does that help to answer your question? And I'm going to go right back to Ricky.
I recently had an encounter with a young gentleman who was HIV positive, and he told me that he had an undetectable viral load. And I thought he might have been relationship material. As it happened, that didn't work out. But had it done, and also I do have some friends at the moment who are in mixed status relationships. They're negative, but they're seeing guys who are positive, but with an undetectable viral load. And if that's the case in a monogamous relationship, is there any benefit to them taking PrEP, or is the risk of an undetectable viral load so low that it wouldn't benefit?
Do you want this one?
Okay, it's a great question. It can be answered on a few levels. First of all is on the partner study. No one who only had sex with their HIV positive, undetectable partner contracted HIV. 3 people on that study did, and it was from a partner that wasn't the partner that was in the study with them, so it was an extra relationship activity. However, you mentioned the lovely M word there, monogamous. You're a gay man. What exactly is monogamy? I'm all for monogamy, and I find it very easy to manage. However, monogamy is not what some people actively choose. It's polygamy, or polyamorous relationships, or in fact, open relationships. And also, if we're not monogamous, generally we don't tend to be too honest about that. So I would say, if it's just a relationship, like we'll talk about the HIV thing, but a relationship, if you decide you want to be on PrEP, you should be on PrEP. It's the amazing thing about PrEP and with HIV, people living with HIV and PrEPsters, is that we are removing the barriers totally. There's no need to have that awkward conversation, like, are you undetectable or are you negative or positive? And also, what we're now doing for the first time is being able to live HIV equal, which is a brilliant thing. But if you're in a relationship with a HIV positive person who's undetectable, you can. It depends on how much you invest. But the thing about PrEP is that it empowers the individual, and I think that's really key. Nobody else's status, nobody else's behavior, as long as it's not damaging to you, should matter a shit to you. Own your own shit, do your own thing. Take PrEP. We might have a question about undetectable and viral blips, is what we call them. To give you a rough figures again, I'll keep it simple. For anal sex, you can have a viral blip, and it can be like 50, 100, whatever, for various different reasons, missing meds or other infections. To be infectious, so undetectable basically means that the machine can't detect any more active virus. A couple of years ago, it used to be under 50 counts. Now it's under 20 in some places, so undetectable has reduced. But all that means is that the machine can't detect active virus. However, for anal sex, you're not infectious till around about 500 counts. For vaginal sex, it's about 1,000. So even if you get a viral blip, you should still be non-infectious. But the thing with science, medicine, drugs, and sex and people in the world is that nothing is ever 100% or guaranteed.
So I'm going to add something very quickly to that. So the NHS England draft prescribing guidelines for PrEP that we had expected to come out for consultation and then go to a meeting to have a decision about it in July. Those prescribing guidelines that I saw at the beginning of the year that had been taken about 18 months to develop were fairly clear and unambiguous that if you were in a monogamous relationship with someone who was positive and they had an undetectable viral load, then you would not be advised to take PrEP. But as you might have picked up in the presentation that I did from my doctoral research, a third of the men I interviewed had a primary HIV positive partner, and some of those men, but not all of them, were in monogamous relationships with those men. And when I asked them about how they thought about PrEP, they broadly understood that it was highly unlikely that they could get HIV from their undetectable positive partner, but they saw other benefits of using PrEP for them personally. So terms like sharing the burden of prevention, being able to have types of sex that we were too scared to have before, taking away the fear, having some kind of spectre of infection removed. And for those men, even though they understood that PrEP would probably not give them much of an added level of HIV prevention, they felt that there were other things, mental health benefits, stress. And in fact, the one thing that fell out that resonated for me as I get older was one of the older guys who had a positive boyfriend said that because they always used condoms, the older partner hadn't been able to maintain an erection or to come with his partner during anal intercourse for the last 5 years. And he said, wouldn't that be amazing if we could have anal intercourse together and I could not be fearful that I could become infected from him? So I think there's a whole set of sexual, mental health, emotional health issues that we should be taking into account. Hi.
This is a technical question, I suppose. I mean, what happens to the HIV virus when it enters into the body of a PrEP user? There might be a supplementary question there in that does it, if in any way the virus remains active or benign in the system, does that mean you are on PrEP for always?
There's actually a really, really good video that I will post the link to on this page. It makes it really, really simple. Basically, HIV can enter the system, and it needs to. Basically, HIV the cell is a little ball with lots of spikes, so like a hedgehoggy kind of thing, yeah. So it comes along and it inserts itself into the receptive cell. And then it invades that cell, replicates, and bursts out of the cell. So basically, what PrEP does is it inhibits the HIV virus being able to get the spike in and to infiltrate that cell. Now, that basically means it's like sort of, I haven't thought about this before, sort of like a condom for cells in your blood, if you want to look at it that way. Let's keep those two together. So the answer to your question is, do you have to be on PrEP forever? No. How HIV works is you've got about an hour or two for it to start trying to get into cells once it gets into the body. And then you have a very busy period of a couple of days. That's why we say get PEP within 72 hours. So you have a busy couple of days when it goes crazy, has a little disco for itself. But after that, if you can block it for that, that you don't need to be on PrEP. We recommend taking, if you're doing the event-based dosing system on PrEP, you only need to take 2 doses afterwards, so up to 48 hours afterwards, and that will see you clear, simply because the tail of tenofovir emtricitabine, what we call the tail, is in how long it takes the drug to drop out of your system, is quite long, and it drops at quite a slow rate for the first week after. It drops by about a couple of % a day over the first week, from 90 to 98, 97, 96. After the first week, it starts to drop considerably at bigger gradients. But if you've not had sex and you take your 2 pills afterwards, for an event-based dosing system, as long as you have a good baseline, you'll be all right. Yeah, I think that's it covered. So the tail is quite long. HIV is only ever really active for a day or 2, and you're always going to be covered if you've got a good baseline on that.
And I know this is the final point, but I just wanted to highlight that as well as the pills that Greg and I have talked about today, there's a fast-moving development on other types of PrEP. And that includes vaginal microbicides. There's been some fantastic international research on using tenofovir-type gels that you insert prior and then after vaginal intercourse. And there's now being work that's developed about rectal gels or foams or tablets or dissolvable kind of frothy things you stick up your hoop before intercourse, enemas, douches, vaginal rings, and now injectables, so short-acting and potentially long-acting injectables. And there's even talk about whether we might be able to combine anti-HIV injectables with things that may in the future also prevent hepatitis C and other infections. So there's huge potential out there. I want to really thank you for having us today. We'll hang around for a little bit longer. Greg needs to have the final word. Thank you.
No, don't clap for him. No, we'll do one big clap at the end. Just on the condoms thing, Terence Higgins Trust have given us their packs, which are down there. They're very multicolored, very gay-licious, just in time for Pride. You'll find one of our cards. It's a double-sided card, the URL for PrEPster and the URL for I Want PrEP Now. Also, all of the memes that you saw, they're kind of a funny, inoffensive way to talk about PrEP, and if you want to share them on Facebook, it's fine. They're all in one blog. The clinic hopping is in a blog. I think that's it. Anything else, we'll make ourselves known on your Facebook page. But thank you, Will, for being my PrEP husband tonight. And thank you all. Thank you very much.